Welcome to the captivating tale of Graham Wilder, a man who retreated from the world after tragedy, and Elena Vos, the mysterious woman who appears at his gate one stormy day. Their unexpected encounter will challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, healing, and second chances. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The morning fog rolled across Briargate Farm, covering the pine trees and green pastures in a thick white blanket. Graham Wilder stepped out onto his porch, coffee cup in hand, and surveyed his kingdom of solitude. At 34, he looked older, his face weathered not by age but by grief, his dark hair streaked with premature grey at the temples. 5 years had passed since he'd walked away from his corner office at Wilder Investments. 5 years since the accident that took his younger brother, Jason. 5 years of hiding from the world. Another day, he muttered, taking a sip of the strong black coffee. The farm had become his sanctuary. The barn needed painting, the fence. Along the east pasture was sagging in spots, but none of that mattered. Here, among his small flock of chickens and the vegetable garden out back, he found peace, or at least something close to it. Graham followed his daily routine, checking the chicken coop, collecting eggs, then heading to the barn to repair a broken shelf. The physical work kept his mind busy, kept the memories at bay. By noon, dark clouds had chased away the morning fog, threatening rain. That's when he heard it, the sound of tires on gravel. Visitors were rare at Briargate. Graham had made sure of that, buying the property at the edge of Pine Creek, a small town where people respected privacy. The occasional delivery truck or local handyman was about all he saw. But this wasn't a truck. It was a sleek black car, expensive and out of place against the rustic backdrop of his farm. Graham put down his hammer and walked out of the barn, suspicious. The car stopped at his gate, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, looking like she had wandered off a fashion magazine page and somehow ended up on his dirt driveway. She wore a cream-colored silk coat that probably cost more than his monthly expenses, heels that sank slightly into the soft ground, and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy day. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place. Graham frowned. She was clearly lost, probably some city executive taking a scenic route to a conference and now needing directions back to the highway. "I took a wrong turn," he called out, not bothering to walk closer. "Highway's back the way you came, about 3 miles. Take a left at the old Miller farm." The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing large, dark eyes that held something Graham hadn't expected: fear. "I'm not lost," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of something desperate. "I just don't know where else to go." Graham stood still, confused. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The woman glanced nervously at the sky. "Look, Miss Elena," she said quickly. "Elena Vos." "Miss Vos, I don't know what you're doing here, but please," she interrupted, her composure cracking slightly. "I just need a place to stay. Just for tonight." The first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold. Elena Vos looked up at the sky, then back at Graham with those haunted eyes. Something about her, the carefully controlled panic, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder at the road behind her, stirred something in Graham. An instinct he thought he'd buried years ago, along with his brother, the need to help. "Fine," he said gruffly. "You can wait out the storm, but just until it passes." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you." Graham opened the gate, watching as she drove the expensive car into his yard. By the time she parked and stepped out again, the rain was coming down in sheets. They made a dash for the porch, Elena stumbling once in her impractical shoes. Inside the farmhouse, Graham was suddenly aware of the dusty floor, the simple, worn furniture, the total lack of decoration. He'd been living like a hermit for so long he'd forgotten what his place might look like to an outsider. Elena stood in his living room, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, looking completely out of place, yet somehow determined. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to dry off," Graham said, gesturing vaguely. "I'll make some coffee." When she returned, she'd removed her coat to reveal an elegant blouse and skirt. Business attire, city clothes. She'd tried to fix her hair, but the rain had won that battle. "Thank you for this," she said, accepting the coffee mug he offered. I know it's strange showing up like this. Why are you here? Graham asked bluntly. And don't. Tell me you were just passing through. Nobody passes through to get to Briargate. Elena's hands tightened around the mug. I needed somewhere no one would think to look for me. Graham raised an eyebrow. Are you in some kind of trouble? Yes, she answered simply, but not the kind you're thinking. I haven't done anything wrong. Just the opposite, actually. The rain pounded against the windows, and Graham found himself caught between curiosity and caution. This woman was bringing complications into his carefully constructed, simple life. Just for tonight, he repeated. The guest room hasn't been used in years, but the sheets are clean. Elena nodded. Thank you. I don't have much with me, she admitted. I left in a hurry. Graham noticed for the first time that she indeed had no luggage, just a large handbag. Running from something, then? Or someone? I'm not running a hotel here, he said more harshly than he intended. And I'm not looking to get involved in whatever you're mixed up in. I understand, Elena said quietly. I'll be gone tomorrow. That night, Graham couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the storm and wondering about the stranger in his guest room. What kind of trouble was she in? And why had he let her stay? He told himself it was just basic human decency. Nothing more. Morning came with clear skies and a surprise. When Graham walked into his kitchen, he found Elena already up, attempting to cook breakfast. I hope you don't mind, she said, gesturing to the eggs sizzling in the pan. I found some eggs in the fridge. Those are fresh, Graham said, collected them yesterday. Eleanor smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I've never had farm fresh eggs before. They ate in awkward silence until Graham finally spoke. You said you'd be leaving today. The smile faded from Eleanor's face. Yes, I did say that. But she put down her fork. But I don't actually have anywhere to go yet. I need a few days to figure things out, to make some calls. Graham frowned. This isn't a... I can work, she interrupted. To earn my keep, I noticed your fence needs fixing, and the garden could use some attention. Graham almost laughed. No offense, but you don't look like the fence-fixing type. I'm a fast learner, Eleanor countered, and I'm stronger than I look. The smart move would be to say no, to send her on her way. But something made Graham hesitate. 3 days, he said finally. That's all. 3 days turned into a week. Despite his doubts, Eleanor proved useful around the farm. She didn't complain about the work, though her hands quickly developed blisters from tasks they weren't used to. She fed the chickens, helped in the garden, and even assisted Graham with minor repairs. But she never talked about herself. Whenever Graham asked about her life or what she was running from, she changed the subject. I worked in finance, was all she offered one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. In the city. Glass towers, high stakes, long hours. And now you're hiding out at a farm in the middle of nowhere, Graham remarked. Elena's eyes clouded. Something broke. In my life. In me, maybe. She looked at him. What about you? You don't seem like the farmer type either. Graham stiffened. He wasn't used to talking about his past. I had a different life before this. What happened? The direct question caught him off guard. Loss, he said simply. Elena nodded, seeming to understand his reluctance to elaborate. They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned from orange to deep purple. Each day Graham found himself watching Elena, the way she closed her eyes when the wind rustled through the trees, how she hummed to herself while working in the garden, the quiet grace with which she moved through his home, as if trying to disturb as little as possible. And sometimes late at night he heard her crying. 1 week stretched into 2. They fell into a routine. Mornings spent working side by side, afternoons often separate, Elena making mysterious phone calls while Graham tended to farm business. Evenings together on the porch or in the living room, where Elena had discovered his old record player. Canned collection of vinyl. You've got good taste, she commented, flipping through albums. Classical, jazz, some old rock and roll. My brother's collection mostly, Graham admitted. He was the music lover. It was the first time he'd mentioned Jason, and Elena seemed to sense the significance. She carefully selected a jazz record and put it on. The mellow notes filled the room. "Dance with me," she said suddenly, holding out her hand. Graham shook his head. "I don't dance." "Everyone dances," Eleanor insisted, "even grumpy farmers." Before he could protest further, she took his hand and pulled him to his feet. There in his dusty living room, with the scratchy sounds of an old jazz record playing, Wilder danced for the first time in 5 years. Elena moved with natural grace, guiding him when he stumbled. And for a brief moment, as her hand rested lightly on his shoulder and her eyes met his, Graham felt something he thought he'd never feel again. A flicker of joy. The moment was broken by the sound of Elena's cell phone. She pulled away abruptly, checking the screen. Her face paled. "I need to take this," she said, hurrying from the room. When she returned 20 minutes later, the carefree woman who had been dancing was gone. In her place was the tense, fearful Eleanor, who had appeared at his gate 2 weeks earlier. "What's wrong?" Graham asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just business." But that night, Graham woke to the sound of movement. He found Elena in the kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness. "You should be sleeping," he said. She jumped slightly. "I couldn't." Graham leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe it's time you told me what you're really doing here, Elena." She turned to face him, her expression torn. "If I tell you, I'll be putting you at risk too." "I think I'm already involved," Graham pointed out. Elena sighed, then nodded. "You're right, you deserve to know." She gestured to the table. "You might want to sit down." They sat across from each other in the dim kitchen light as Elena finally told her story. "I worked for Meridian Global," she began, "one of the largest financial institutions in the country. I was their risk assessment director." Graham nodded. Even in his isolation, he'd heard of Meridian. 6 months ago, I discovered something in our investment portfolio: illegal activities, money laundering, fraud, connections to organized crime. Eleanor's voice was steady but quiet. "When I brought it to the CEO's attention, he told me to bury it. When I refused, I was threatened." "By who?" Graham asked. "By everyone. My boss, the board, even some government officials who were being paid off." Elena's hands were shaking now. "I gathered evidence for months. 2 weeks ago, I turned everything over to federal prosecutors. I'm their key witness in a case that could bring down some very powerful people." Graham felt a chill. "And these people know who you are?" Elena nodded. "The FBI suggested witness protection, but there was a leak in the office. Someone tipped off Meridian's security team. They were coming for me. I had to disappear faster. Then the protection program could move. So you ran. I needed somewhere off the grid, somewhere no one would think to look." She gave a sad smile. "A former colleague once mentioned this remote town where his uncle lived. I remembered the name, Pine Creek. I drove here with no real plan, just hoping to find a motel or something. And instead, you found my farm," Graham finished. "I saw the gate, the isolated property. It seemed perfect." Eleanor looked at him directly. "I should have been honest from the start. I'm sorry." Graham processed this information, the weight of it settling over the kitchen. "How long until the trial?" "At least a month, maybe more. The prosecutors are building their case. And until then," Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I can't go back. I can't risk being found." Graham knew he should be angry. This woman had brought danger to his doorstep, had involved him in something far bigger than himself. He should tell her to leave. Instead, he heard himself say, "Then you'll stay here." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Graham, you don't understand. These people are dangerous." "No one comes to Briargate," Graham said firmly. "No one even knows I'm here. This is the last place anyone would look for you." "I can't ask you to take that risk," Elena protested. "You didn't ask," Graham pointed out. "I offered." Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. A new day, a new reality. Graham Wilder, who had spent 5 years hiding from life, was now harboring a woman on the run, a woman who was quickly becoming more important to him than he wanted to admit. The days at Briargate Farm settled into a new rhythm. Graham and Elena worked side by side, their movements becoming more synchronized as they adjusted to each other's presence. The garden flourished under Elena's care, while Graham focused on the repairs he'd been putting off for years. Elena proved to be a quick learner. Her city-soft hands toughened, and she traded her silk blouses for Graham's old flannel shirts, rolled at the sleeves. Her dark hair was often pulled back in a simple ponytail now, her face free of makeup. In these quiet moments, Graham found himself watching her, noticing how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "You're staring again," Elena said. One morning, as they shared breakfast on the porch, Graham looked away quickly, just wondering how a financial executive knows so much about gardening. "My grandmother," Eleanor explained, stirring her tea. "She had a small garden behind her apartment building. It was our special place." A shadow crossed her face. "She always said growing things was good for the soul." "Smart woman," Graham commented. "She was," Elena agreed. "She raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 8. It was the most personal information she'd shared about herself, and Graham recognized the offering for what it was, a small piece of trust. "My brother and I were raised by our dad," he found himself saying. "Mom left when we were kids. Dad worked 2 jobs to keep us fed." Elena nodded, not pushing for more. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning mist lift from the fields. Later that afternoon, while fixing a broken fence post, Graham finally spoke about Jason. "He was 3 years younger than me," he said, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "Smart kid, creative. He was the one who followed our dad into the business. I was supposed to be watching out for him." Elena handed him another nail. "What happened?" Graham paused, the weight of memory pressing down on him. "Company party. I'd had too much to drink. Jason offered to drive." His voice turned hollow. "Truck. Ran a red light. Hit us on the passenger side." "Oh, Graham," Elena said softly. "I walked away with a broken arm and some cuts," Graham continued, staring at the fence. "Jason never walked again. Never opened his eyes. After 3 months, Dad agreed to turn off the machines." Elena placed her hand on his arm, a gentle touch that somehow steadied him. "The family business fell apart after that," Graham finished. "Dad's heart gave out 6 months later. I sold everything, bought this place, been hiding ever since." "You weren't hiding," Elena said firmly. "You were healing." Graham looked at her, really looked at her. In that moment, with her understanding eyes and dirt-smudged cheek, she seemed like the only person in the world who could possibly understand. "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "Any family worried about you?" Eleanor shook her head. "My grandmother passed 2 years ago. I threw myself into work after that." Her expression hardened slightly. "That's when I started noticing things at Meridian, discrepancies in the books, meetings I wasn't invited to." "Or you could have looked the other way," Graham pointed out. "Would you have?" she challenged. Graham thought about it. "No," he admitted. "But I'm not sure I would have had your courage either." That evening, they sat together on the old porch swing, a bottle of wine between them. The night was cool but clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "I miss this," Eleanor said, gesturing upward. "In the city, you can barely see the stars." "It's one of the reasons I stay," Graham replied. "That and the silence." Eleanor took a sip of wine. "Doesn't it get lonely?" The question hit closer to home than Graham wanted to admit. Before Elena's arrival, he'd convinced himself that loneliness was part of his penance. Now, with her beside him, the emptiness of his previous existence was painfully clear. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's safer. This way, safer than what?" "Than caring about people again," Graham said honestly, "than having something to lose." Elena's eyes reflected the starlight as she looked at him. "That's no way to live, Graham," says the woman hiding from killers, he countered with a small smile. She laughed, a genuine throaty sound that made something warm unfurl in Graham's chest. "Fair point," she conceded. "Maybe we're both hiding from life." The next day, Graham drove into town for supplies, leaving Elena at the farm. He wasn't. Worried about her safety, Briar Gate was too isolated for anyone to stumble upon it accidentally. Still, he hurried through his errands, uncomfortable with the separation. At the general store, Mary Jenkins, the owner's wife, chatted as she rang up his purchases. "You're buying more groceries than usual, Graham," she observed. "Got company?" Graham tensed. In a small town like Pine Creek, news traveled fast. "Just stocking up," he replied evasively. Mary nodded, but her eyes held a knowing look. "Well, it's nice to see you getting out more. Been too long since Jason passed." Graham flinched. At his brother's name. 5 years next month, he said quietly. Mary patted his hand. "Life goes on, dear. Jason wouldn't want you hiding away forever. It was the second time in 2 days someone had accused him of hiding." Graham left the store disturbed by the observation. When he returned to the farm, he found Elena in the kitchen attempting to bake bread. Flour dusted her cheeks and hair, and the countertops were a mess. But her smile when she saw him made Graham forget his troubled thoughts. "Don't laugh," she warned. "The dough is winning this battle." Graham set down his groceries and moved beside her. "Here," he said, placing his hands over hers to demonstrate the proper kneading technique. Like this, their bodies were close, her back against his chest. Graham could smell the floral scent of her shampoo mixed with the yeasty aroma of the... "Fred?" For a moment, neither of them moved. "Graham?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "You've got flour everywhere," he said, trying to sound normal. "I'll go unload the truck." Outside, Graham leaned against his pickup, taking deep breaths of the cool air. What was happening to him? To them? This wasn't part of the plan when he'd agreed to let her stay. But plans changed. That was the lesson life had been trying to teach him since Jason's death. Nothing was permanent. Nothing was guaranteed, except this strange, unexpected feeling growing inside him whenever Elena was near. That night, 3 weeks after Elena's arrival at Briargate, a thunderstorm rolled across the farm. The wind howled. Through the pine trees and rain lashed against the windows. Graham and Elena sat in the living room, a fire crackling in the old stone fireplace. "I should check the barn," Graham said, rising from his chair as a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house. "In this weather?" Elena looked concerned. "Can't it wait until morning?" Graham shook his head. "The roof's been leaking. Need to make sure the hay stays dry." He pulled on his raincoat and boots, grabbing a flashlight from the drawer. "I'll be quick," he promised. The storm's fury hit him full force as he stepped outside. Graham bent his head against the driving rain and made his way to the barn. Inside, he checked the roof. Water was dripping in one corner, but nothing catastrophic. He placed a bucket under the leak and was turning to leave when he heard a vehicle approaching. Graham froze. No one came to Briargate at night. No one came during a storm like this, unless they had a very good reason. Peering through a crack in the barn door, Graham saw headlights cutting through the rain, moving slowly up his driveway. Not the familiar lights of a neighbor's truck. These were bright, expensive. Like those on the black SUV now pulling up to his house, Graham's heart pounded. Elena's warning echoed in his mind. These people are dangerous. He watched as a man stepped out of the SUV, tall and imposing even in the downpour. The stranger walked confidently to the front door and knocked. Graham's first instinct was to run to the house to protect Elena, but caution held him back. What if there were others? What if the man was armed? Through the rain-streaked window, Graham could see Elena approach the door. She peered through the peephole, then stepped back as if she'd been burned. She didn't open the door. The man knocked. Again, harder this time. When there was no answer, he stepped back, surveying the house. Then, to Graham's horror, he moved to the window, cupping his hands against the glass to peer inside. Graham had seen enough. Slipping out the back of the barn, he circled wide around the yard, staying in the shadows. The rain provided good cover, masking both sound and visibility. He reached the back door of the farmhouse just as he heard the front door splinter open. Inside, Graham moved silently through the kitchen, grabbing the shotgun he kept mounted above. The door. It wasn't loaded, hadn't been for years, but the intruder wouldn't know that. He heard voices from the living room. "Miss Voss," a deep, smooth voice was saying. "Did you really think you could hide forever? How did you find me?" Eleanor's voice was steady despite the fear Graham knew she must be feeling. "Small towns talk," the man replied. "Someone reported a strange car, a woman matching your description." It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Graham stepped into the doorway, shotgun raised. "Get out of my house," he said coldly. The intruder turned slowly. He was well dressed despite the rain, with an expensive coat and leather gloves. His face was handsome in a predatory way, sharp cheekbones, calculating eyes. "Mr. Wilder, I presume," the man said, unruffled by the shotgun. "I'm Carter Reynolds, head of security for Meridian Global." "I don't care who you are," Graham replied. "You're trespassing." Reynolds smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I'm simply retrieving company property." He gestured to Elena. "Ms. Voss has some files that belong to us." "I don't have anything with me," Elena said. "Everything I took is with the prosecutors." "We both know that's not true," Reynolds countered smoothly. "The backup drive, Elena, that's what we want." Graham kept the shotgun steady. "She said she doesn't have it. Now leave." Reynolds studied him for a moment, then laughed softly. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself involved in, do you?" He turned back to Elena. "Does he know the price on your head? Does he know what happens to people who help whistleblowers like you?" "That's enough." Graham stepped forward. "Next time I won't ask nicely." Reynolds raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for violence, I'm leaving." He moved toward the door, then paused. "But I'll be back, Ms. Voss, with more men. And next time your farmer friend won't be able to protect you." After Reynolds left, Graham locked the broken door as best he could, propping a chair against it. Eleanor stood in the middle of the living room, pale and shaking. "Are you hurt?" Graham asked, setting down the shotgun. She shook her head. "No, but Graham, he found me. They'll all be coming now." "He was bluffing," Graham said, trying to sound confident. "He's just one man." "You don't understand." Elena's voice rose with panic. "Carter Reynolds doesn't bluff. If he says he'll be back with more men, he will be. We have hours at most." Graham ran a hand through his wet hair, thinking quickly. "Then we'll be gone before they return." "We?" Elena looked at him in surprise. "I'm not letting you face this alone," Graham said firmly. "Pack whatever you have. I know a place they won't find us." As Elena hurried to gather her few belongings, Graham went to his bedroom and pulled an old duffel bag from under the bed. Inside was a bundle of cash, the last of what he'd saved from selling the family business. He'd been saving it for an emergency. This qualified. Within 20 minutes, they were in Graham's truck driving away from Briargate Farm. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain reduced to a steady drizzle. "Where are we going?" Helena asked, looking back at the farmhouse as it disappeared into the darkness. "My father had a hunting cabin," Graham explained, eyes on the winding road. "About 3 hours north of here. No electricity, no phone, completely off the grid." Eleanor leaned back in her seat, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to your door, Graham." Graham reached over and took her hand, surprising both of them with the gesture. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You did the right thing exposing Meridian. But now you're involved. Your life is in danger because of me." Graham squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe my life needed some danger," he said with a small smile. "I was getting too comfortable hiding away at that farm." Elena turned to look at him, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They drove through the night, the storm gradually clearing to reveal a star-filled sky. Graham felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in 5 years, he was fully awake, fully present. And it was all because of the woman sitting beside him, a woman who had appeared at his gate less than a month ago, turning his carefully constructed solitude upside down. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Graham made Elena a silent promise. He would protect her, whatever it took, even if it meant finally facing the world he'd been running from for so long. The hunting cabin stood alone in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was small, just one room with a stone fireplace and basic furniture, but solid. Graham's father had built it with his own hands decades ago, a retreat from the pressures of business and family. As Graham parked the truck behind the cabin where it couldn't be seen from the narrow dirt road, Elena studied their new hideout. "It's perfect," she said, stepping out of the truck. "No one would think to look here." Graham nodded, grabbing their bags. "Dad used to say if you really want to disappear, go where there's no cell service and plenty of mosquitoes." Inside, a layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise the cabin was in good condition. Graham set to work lighting the fireplace while Elena cleaned off the table and chairs. "How long do you think we can stay here?" she asked, wiping dust. "From the small window." "As long as needed," Graham replied, adding another log to the growing fire. "I have enough cash to last us a while. There's a small town about 20 miles back where we can get supplies." Elena sat on the edge of the simple bed, suddenly looking very tired. The adrenaline that had carried her through their midnight escape was wearing off. "I should call my contact at the FBI," she said. "Let them know Reynolds found me." Graham shook his head. "No phones, not yet. Reynolds said someone in town reported seeing you. That means they're watching. Any call could lead them straight to us. Then how do I testify? The trial is in 3 weeks." Graham sat beside her. "We'll figure it out. For now, we need to rest." Later that evening, after a simple meal cooked over the fire, they sat together on the cabin's small porch. The night was clear, the air crisp with the scent of pine. "This reminds me of camping with my grandmother," Eleanor said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "She believed city people needed regular doses of wilderness to stay sane." Graham smiled. "Smart woman." "She would have liked you," Elena said softly. She turned to look at him. "Graham, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Reynolds wasn't completely lying. Elena bit her lip. "I do have a backup drive. Not with me, it's hidden at Briar Gate." Graham stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was trying to protect you," Elena explained. "The less you knew, the safer you were. But now..." She took a deep breath. "That drive has everything: bank records, photos of meetings with known criminals, recorded conversations. Without it, the case against Meridian is much weaker." "Where exactly did you hide it?" "In the barn. There's a loose board in the hayloft. I put it there my second day at the farm." Graham ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "Reynolds will tear the place apart looking for it. I know, that's why we need to go back and get it before he does." "That's exactly what they'd expect us to do," Graham pointed out. "They're probably watching the farm right now." Elena nodded. "Probably, but we have to try." She reached for his hand. "I'm not asking you to go back. This is my fight. I'll find a way to get there myself." Graham's fingers tightened around hers. "We're in this together now," he said firmly, "but we need a plan. We can't just drive up to the farm and hope for the best." They spent the next day strategizing. Graham drew a rough map of Briar Gate and the surrounding area, marking possible approach routes and escape paths. "There's an old logging trail that runs behind the property," he explained, pointing to his drawing. "It's overgrown, but we could make it through on foot. Come in after dark, get the drive, and be gone before they know we were there." Elena studied the map. "What if they have the place surrounded?" "Then we adapt," Graham said simply. "But we won't know until we try." That night, Graham found himself unable to sleep. He stood by the window, watching the moonlight filter through the trees. Behind him, Elena slept fitfully on the bed while he had taken the old couch. When had his life changed so completely? One moment he was a recluse, hiding from the world and his past. The next, he was planning what amounted to a covert operation to help a woman he barely knew. Except that wasn't true anymore. In the weeks since Eleanor had arrived at Briar Gate, he'd come to know her better than he'd allowed himself to know anyone. Since Jason's death, her determination, her quiet strength, the way she faced fear head-on instead of running from it. In the moonlight, Graham made his decision. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't return to his life of isolation. Eleanor had woken. Something in him, a desire to live again, not just exist. 2 days later, they made their move. They left the cabin at dusk, driving Graham's truck as far as they dared before continuing on foot through the dense forest that bordered Briar Gate Farm. Night had fully fallen by the time they reached the edge of the property. Graham signaled for Elena to stay low as they crouched behind a fallen tree studying the farmhouse. "There's a car parked out front," he whispered. "Black sedan, and lights in the house." Elena nodded grimly. "Reynolds. Probably not alone either," Graham added, scanning the yard. "See how the barn door is partly open? They've been searching." Eleanor's face was determined in the moonlight. "We need to get to that hayloft." They waited, watching the house for any movement. After 20 minutes, 2 men emerged, lit cigarettes glowing in the darkness. "We've been over every inch of this place," one complained, his voice carrying in the still night air. "If there was a drive, we would have found it by now." "Boss says keep looking," the other replied. "She hid it somewhere." The men moved toward the barn, and Graham pulled Elena deeper into the shadows. "Change of plan," he whispered. "We can't get to the barn with them searching it." "Then what do we do?" Elena's voice was tense. Graham thought for a moment. "Create a diversion." He pointed to the chicken coop on the far side of the property. "If we can draw them away from the barn, one of us can slip in and get the drive." "I'll create the diversion," Elena offered. "I know exactly where the drive is. Tell me what to do." Graham shook his head. "Too risky. I know this land better than you. I'll draw them off. You get the drive." Before Elena could argue, Graham picked up a rock and handed it to her. "When you hear the commotion, count to 30, then make for the barn. The loose board is in the back corner of the hayloft." Elena nodded. "Behind the old saddle rack. Get the drive and head straight back into the woods. Don't wait for me. I'll meet you at the fallen oak we passed about half a mile back." Elena grabbed his arm as he started to move away. "Graham, be careful." In the darkness, her eyes reflected the starlight, full of concern and something more, something that made Graham's heart beat faster. "You too," he said softly. Graham circled around to the far side of the property, moving silently through the underbrush. When he reached the chicken coop, he took a deep breath, then kicked over a stack of feed buckets, creating a loud clatter. The chickens erupted in a chorus of squawks and protests. Graham knocked over more equipment, making as much noise as possible, before darting into the shadows. As expected, the men by the barn reacted immediately. "What was that?" one called, already moving toward the chicken coop. "Probably just a raccoon," the other replied, but followed his companion nevertheless. Graham led them on a chase, making noise in different locations, staying just ahead of their flashlight beams. From the corner of his eye, he saw Elena's slim figure slip into the barn. One of the men was getting too close. Graham picked up a fallen branch and hurled it deep into the woods, away from the barn. The crash distracted the guards long enough for him to change position. "Someone's out there," one of the men shouted. "Call the boss." Graham's heart sank as a third man emerged from the house. Carter Reynolds, recognizable even in the darkness. The security chief barked orders, sending his men to search the perimeter. Inside the barn, Elena would be trapped if they returned before she found the drive. Graham needed to keep them away longer. Taking a calculated risk, he darted across an open space, making sure they glimpsed him. "There," one shouted, "in the south field." All three men gave chase exactly as Graham had hoped. He led them away from the barn, toward the dense forest. Reynolds was surprisingly fast for a corporate security man, nearly closing the gap before Graham disappeared into the tree line. For 20 minutes, Graham led them on a wild chase through the woods, using every trick he'd learned hunting these forests with his father. Finally, when he was certain Elena had had enough time, he circled back toward their meeting point. The fallen oak was exactly where they'd left it, but Elena wasn't there. Graham crouched in the shadows, waiting, watching. Had she been caught, or was she simply delayed? Minutes felt like hours as he scanned the darkness, straining to hear any sound above the normal forest noises. Finally, he heard soft footsteps. Approaching. "Graham." Eleanor's whisper was barely audible. "Here," he replied, relief flooding through him. She hurried to his side, her face flushed with success. "I got it," she said, patting her pocket. "Let's go." They moved quickly through the forest, putting distance between themselves and the farm. Behind them, they could hear shouts as Reynolds and his men realized they'd been outmaneuvered. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached Graham's truck. They drove in tense silence, constantly checking the rear-view mirror for signs of pursuit. Only when they were back at the cabin, doors locked and windows covered, did they finally relax. Elena pulled a small flash drive from her pocket, holding it up like a trophy. "Everything we need to bring down Meridian Global," she said. "Names, dates, account numbers." Graham sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "Now what?" "Now I contact the FBI," Elena said firmly. "It's time to end this." Using a burner phone Graham had purchased in the small town, Elena made her call. After a tense conversation with her contact, she hung up, looking both relieved and nervous. "They're sending agents to pick me up tomorrow," she told Graham. Be placed in protective custody until the trial. Graham nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. That's good. You'll be safe. Come with me, Elena said suddenly. Graham looked up in surprise. What? Come with me, she repeated, moving to kneel in front of his chair. Reynolds knows your face now. You're not safe here. I can take care of myself, Graham said automatically. Elena took his hands in hers. I know you can, but I don't want you to have to. Her eyes were earnest, vulnerable. These past weeks with you, they've changed me, Graham. You've shown me what it means to have someone to rely on, to trust completely. Graham's heart hammered in his chest. Eleanor, I'm not asking for promises, she continued quickly. Just don't disappear on me, not yet. Graham looked at this woman who had crashed into his carefully isolated life and turned it upside down, who had forced him to feel again, to care again, who had given him a purpose beyond mere existence. Okay, he said simply. I'll come with you. Elena's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon, warm and full of promise. Without thinking, Graham leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when Eleanor responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, Graham rested his forehead against hers. I thought I was done with the world, he said softly. I thought I deserved to be alone after what happened to Jason. No one deserves to be alone, Elena whispered, running her fingers through his hair. Especially not you. That night, they slept in each other's arms, finding comfort in simple closeness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: federal agents, protective custody, the looming trial. But for now, in this small cabin in the woods, they had found something neither expected: a second chance. Morning came too quickly. Graham and Elena packed their few belongings, preparing for the FBI's arrival. According to Elena's contact, agents would meet them at a designated location about an hour's drive from the cabin. Are you nervous? Graham asked, as they loaded the truck. Elena nodded. A little. Everything's about to change again. She looked at him. What about you? Having second thoughts about coming with me? Graham shook his head. No, for the first time in years, I'm sure about something. They were about to leave when the sound of a vehicle approaching made them both freeze. Graham moved to the window, peering carefully through the curtain. Black SUV, he said grimly, similar to Reynolds' vehicle. Elena joined him at the window. It can't be the FBI. They're not supposed to meet us here. We need to go, now. Graham grabbed their bags. Out, the back. They slipped out the rear door of the cabin just as the SUV pulled up front. Moving quickly but quietly, they made for the dense trees behind the cabin. Graham had nearly reached the tree line when he heard Elena gasp. Turning, he saw her stumble. Her ankle caught in a hidden root. She fell awkwardly, unable to stifle a cry of pain. The sound carried in the quiet forest. From the front of the cabin, they heard a man's voice. Check the back. Graham rushed to Elena's side, helping her up. Can you walk? She tried to put weight on her injured ankle and winced. Not fast enough. Graham made a split-second decision. I'll lead them away. You hide in the woods. No! Eleanor clutched his arm. We stay together. If we both run, they'll catch us, Graham said urgently. This is the only way. Before Elena could protest further, Graham helped her into a dense thicket where she would be hidden from view. When they follow me, make your way to the truck. The keys are in it. Drive to the meeting point and wait for the FBI. Graham, please. He cut her off with a quick, fierce kiss. Trust me, he whispered. I'll find you. Then he was gone, crashing deliberately through the underbrush, making as much noise as possible. Behind him, he heard men shouting, following his trail exactly as he intended. Graham ran deeper into the forest, using every trick he knew to stay ahead of his pursuers. These weren't Reynolds' corporate thugs. These men moved with military precision. Who had Reynolds called in to help him? For nearly 20 minutes, Graham led them on a chase through the woods. Finally, certain he'd given Elena enough time to reach the truck, he doubled back, aiming to circle around to the meeting point. The sound of a vehicle starting in the distance gave him hope. Elena had made it to the truck. She would be safe. Graham changed direction, heading for the small town where they could rendezvous. But as he crossed a small clearing, a figure stepped from behind a tree, blocking his path. Carter Reynolds stood there, a gun pointed casually at Graham's chest. "Mr. Wilder," he said smoothly, "you've led us quite a chase." Graham stopped, calculating his options. Reynolds looked relaxed, confident. "Where's Ms. Voss?" Reynolds asked. When Graham remained silent, the security chief sighed. "I respect your loyalty. Really, I do. But you need to understand the stakes here." "I understand perfectly," Graham replied. "You're trying to silence a witness who can expose your company's crimes." Reynolds laughed. "Is that what she told you? That she's some noble whistleblower?" He shook his head. "Eleanor Voss isn't trying to bring Meridian down out of a sense of justice, Mr. Wilder. She wants revenge." "What are you talking about?" "Did she tell you about her relationship with our CEO?" Reynolds asked. "About how he ended things when it became inconvenient?" Graham felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "You're lying." "Am I?" Reynolds stepped closer. "Ask yourself this. Why would a woman like Elena Voss, educated, sophisticated, ambitious, suddenly appear at your isolated farm? Of all the places she could have hidden, why there?" Before Graham could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching broke the tension. Reynolds smiled. "That would be the FBI," he said. "Right on time." Graham's confusion must have shown on his face, because Reynolds laughed again. "You didn't really think Eleanor called the FBI, did you?" he asked. "She called me, Mr. Wilder. We've been tracking her phone since she left the city." Two black SUVs pulled up at the edge of the clearing. Men in suits emerged, but Graham immediately sensed something was wrong. These weren't federal agents. "Where's Elena?" he demanded. Reynolds gestured to one of the SUVs. "By now she should be having a very interesting conversation with my colleagues." Fear gripped Graham's heart. Had Eleanor been captured? Was everything Reynolds saying true? As if reading his thoughts, Reynolds added, "She's not what you think." "She is, Mr. Wilder. And neither am I." He reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a badge. "Carter Reynolds, FBI. The real FBI." Graham stared at the badge, then at Reynolds. "I don't understand." "Elena Voss isn't a whistleblower," Reynolds explained. "She's a skilled hacker who stole millions from Meridian Global's accounts before disappearing. The evidence on that drive? Fabricated to cover her tracks." Graham shook his head. "No, I don't believe you." "You don't have to take my word for it," Reynolds said, gesturing to the SUVs. "Come with us. See for yourself." As Graham was escorted to the vehicle, doubt crept into his mind. Had he been played for a fool? Was the woman he'd begun to care for, perhaps even love, nothing but a criminal using him for protection? He thought of their midnight escape from the farm, of Elena's tears when she spoke of exposing Meridian's corruption, of the way she looked at him when they kissed. No, whatever the truth was, it couldn't be as simple as Reynolds claimed. Eleanor was no saint. She had her secrets, her darker edges, but Graham had seen her soul in those quiet moments at Briargate. There was more to this story. As the SUV pulled away, Graham looked out the window at the forest rushing past. Somewhere out there, Elena was either running for her life or being held against her will. Either way, he had to find her and discover the truth. The FBI field office in Portland was a stark building of glass and steel. Graham sat in a windowless interrogation room, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He'd been there for hours, answering the same questions repeatedly. "Let me go through this one more time," said Agent Larson, a stern woman with tired eyes. "When did you first meet Elena Voss?" Graham sighed. "Like I told you and Agent Reynolds 5 times already. She showed up at my farm about a month ago. Said she needed a place to stay. And you just let a stranger into your home?" Larson's tone was skeptical. "She looked scared," Graham replied simply. Larson slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of Elena, elegant in business attire, standing next to an older man at what appeared to be a charity event. "This is Robert Kincaid, CEO of Meridian Global," Larson explained. "Eleanor Voss was his executive assistant for 3 years. According to our investigation, they were also romantically involved." Graham stared at the photo, trying to reconcile. This polished, smiling woman with the Elena he knew, the woman who had cried silently at night, who had helped him mend fences and feed chickens. 2 months ago, Larson continued, a series of unauthorized transfers emptied several of Meridian's offshore accounts, nearly $50 million gone. The same day, Elena Voss disappeared. That doesn't make her guilty, Graham argued. No, Larson agreed. But this does. She showed him another document, a bank statement for an account in the Cayman Islands. This account was opened in Elena's name 3 days before the theft. The money went there, then was moved again. Graham shook his head. If she stole $50 million, why was she hiding at a rundown farm? Why not fly to some country without extradition? The door opened, and Carter Reynolds entered. He looked different in his official FBI jacket, more authoritative, less the sleek corporate security man. Because she needed the drive, Reynolds said, sitting across from Graham. The evidence she claims to have against Meridian? It's actually the encryption key to access the stolen funds. Graham looked between the two agents. You're saying I've been harboring a thief. I'm saying you've been manipulated by a very smart, very desperate woman, Reynolds corrected. Where is she now, Graham? Where were you supposed to meet her? Before Graham could answer, another agent burst into the room. Sir, we've got a hit on the truck. State police found it abandoned at a rest stop on Highway 26. Reynolds stood immediately. She's running, get a team out there now. As the agents hurried from the room, Graham was left alone with his thoughts. Had everything between him and Elena been a lie? The shared confidences, the quiet moments, the growing feelings, was it all manipulation on her part? His mind replayed their conversations, searching for clues he might have missed. Eleanor had never fully explained how she chose Briargate. Had she targeted him specifically? Used his isolation and loneliness against him? The door opened again and Reynolds returned. You're free to go, Mr. Wilder, for now. His expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I believe you were an unwitting accomplice. Graham stood. What happens now? We find her, Reynolds said simply, and recover the stolen money. And if I see her? Reynolds handed Graham a card. Call that number immediately. Do not engage with her. She's not what you think she is. Outside the FBI office, Graham stood on the sidewalk, unsure what to do next. His truck was gone, his farm potentially under surveillance, and his heart was torn between what he'd been told and what he'd felt. A taxi pulled up in front of the building, and a familiar voice called his name. Mary Jenkins, the store owner's wife from Pine Creek, waved from the back seat. Graham, thank goodness I found you. She hurried out of the taxi. I've been looking everywhere. Mary, what are you doing here? The older woman grabbed his arm. There's no time. She said you'd be here. She said to tell you Briargate isn't safe anymore, but the path is still open. Graham's heart raced. Eleanor contacted you? Mary nodded. Called the store about an hour ago. Said to find you and give you this. She pressed a small envelope into his hand. Now I've got to get back. Frank will be wondering where I am. Before Graham could ask more questions, Mary was back in the taxi, leaving him alone with the envelope. Inside was a key and a note with an address scrawled in Elena's elegant handwriting. At the bottom, the truth isn't always what it seems. Trust your heart, not their lies. Graham looked back at the FBI building, then at the note. Everything logical told him to return to Reynolds, to hand over the note, to wash his hands of Elena Voss and her complications. But his heart... 20 minutes later, Graham stood outside a storage facility on the outskirts of Portland. Unit 242, according to the address Elena had provided. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a small room containing only a laptop computer and a folder. Graham opened the folder first, finding documentation that contradicted everything the FBI had told him. Bank records showed the money from Meridian's accounts hadn't been stolen. It had been moved to protect it from being emptied by Kincaid himself. There were photos of Kincaid meeting with known criminals, copies of threatening emails sent to Elena when she first raised concerns about the company's activities. And there was a newspaper clipping about a woman named Catherine Voss, Eleanor's grandmother, who had lost her life savings in a financial scheme orchestrated by one of Meridian's subsidiary companies. The date matched when Elena said she had first noticed irregularities in Meridian's books. Graham turned on the laptop. A video file was open and ready to play. He clicked it and Elena's face filled the screen. "Graham, if you're watching this, it means you've chosen to trust me despite what they've told you." Her expression was both sad and determined. "I'm sorry for bringing all this trouble into your life. Sorry for not being completely honest from the start." She took a deep breath. "Yes, I worked for Robert Kincaid. Yes, we were involved, but when I discovered what he was really doing with Meridian's money, laundering funds for criminal enterprises, defrauding investors like my grandmother, I couldn't stay silent." Eleanor explained how she had gathered evidence for months, how she had planned to take it to the real FBI, not knowing that Kincaid had connections within the agency. "Carter Reynolds isn't FBI, Graham. He works for Kincaid, covering up his crimes. The real federal agents are from the Treasury Department. I've been working with them, but there was a leak. That's why I had to run." Graham listened, pieces falling into place. The contradictions in Reynolds' story, the rushed interrogation, the convenient evidence. "I never meant to involve you," Elena continued. "I chose Briargate because it was remote, not because of you. But then," her voice softened, "but then I got to know you, and everything changed." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry I had to leave without saying goodbye. And I'm sorry to ask you for one more thing, but I have no one else I can trust." She explained that the drive they had recovered contained more than just evidence against Meridian. It had account numbers, passwords, everything needed to return the stolen money to its rightful owners, the investors Kincaid had defrauded. The Treasury Department needs that drive, but Reynolds and his men will be watching all the official channels. "I need you to deliver it for me." She gave an address and a time. "After that, you can go back to your life at Briargate. You can forget about me and all of this." The video ended, leaving Graham with a decision to make. Back on the street, he hailed a taxi. The drive would be in his jacket pocket where Elena had hidden it before they were separated. The question was, who should he give it to? The taxi driver looked at him expectantly. "Where to, buddy?" Graham hesitated, then gave the address Elena had provided. Whatever the truth was, he needed to see this through to the end. The address turned out to be a public library in downtown Portland. Following Eleanor's instructions, Graham made his way to the reference section, looking for a specific book on finance. Inside the book was a business card for Agent Diana Chen, U.S. Treasury Department. With a phone number handwritten on the back, Graham found a quiet corner and made the call. "This is Chen," a woman's voice answered. "My name is Graham Wilder," he began. "Eleanor Voss sent me." There was a pause. "Where are you right now, Mr. Wilder?" "Portland Central Library." "Stay there. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. How will I recognize you?" "Blue jacket, gray hair at the temples. I'll be in the reference section." 20 tense minutes later, a woman in a tailored suit approached Graham. She showed him her Treasury Department credentials. "Do you have the drive?" she asked without preamble. Graham studied her. "How do I know you're not working for Kincaid too?" Agent Chen's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Smart question. Elena said you were careful." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. Elena sitting in what looked like a safe house, holding today's newspaper. "She's in protective custody, the real kind." Relief flooded through Graham. "She's safe. For now," Chen replied. "But without that drive, we don't have enough to keep Kincaid and his people behind bars for long." Graham handed over the flash drive. "What happens now?" "Now we finish what Elena started," Chen said, pocketing the drive. "Kincaid gets arrested, his associates too, including your friend Reynolds." "And Elena?" "Witness protection, most likely. At least until the trial is over." Graham nodded, a hollow feeling spreading in his chest. Eleanor was safe, but lost to him. He would return to Briargate, if it was even safe to do so, and she would disappear into a new identity, a new life. "She left something else for you," Chen added, handing Graham an envelope. "Asked me to give you this if you came through with the drive." Graham opened it with unsteady hands. Inside was a key attached to a small wooden charm carved in the shape of a gate and a note with just an address and 3 words, "If you choose." Agent Chen smiled at his confusion. "She said you'd understand when you were ready. Later that night, After giving his official statement to the Treasury Department, Graham checked into a small hotel. The news was already reporting the arrest of Robert Kincaid on charges of fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Carter Reynolds had also been taken into custody. Elena's name wasn't mentioned, but Graham knew she was at the center of it all. He sat on the edge of the bed, turning the wooden key charm over in his hands. The address in the note was for a place in Seattle, hundreds of miles from Briar Gate. If you choose, Elena had written, a new start, a different life, with her. Graham closed his eyes, thinking of his farm. For 5 years it had been his sanctuary, his hiding place, his prison. In the morning, Graham drove a rental car back to Briar Gate. The farm looked exactly as they had left it, peaceful, isolated, waiting. He walked through each room, remembering Elena's presence there, her laughter in the kitchen, her silhouette against the sunset on the porch. In the barn, he climbed to the hayloft where she had hidden the drive. Someone, Reynolds and his men probably, had torn up the floorboards, searching. Graham ran his hand over the rough wood, thinking. "She said you'd understand when you were ready," Agent Chen had told him, and suddenly, he did. Briar Gate had been his refuge after losing Jason, a place to hide from pain and responsibility. But Elena had shown him that hiding wasn't living, that the past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. Graham spent the next week settling his affairs. He called a real estate agent, arranged for the sale of the farm, packed the few belongings that mattered, photos of his family, Jason's music collection, the simple gifts Elena had left behind. On his last night at Briar Gate, Graham stood on the porch watching the stars come out one by one. He thought of Elena doing the same wherever she was now, waiting to see if he would choose a new path. The key she had given him felt warm in his hand, full of possibility. 2 days later, Graham stood outside a small house on a quiet street in Seattle. The wooden gate at the front bore a striking resemblance to the charm on his key. Heart pounding, he unlocked it and walked up the path to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. Elena stood there, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes hopeful but uncertain. "You came," she said softly. Graham nodded. "I chose." They looked at each other for a long moment, all the unspoken words hovering between them. Then Elena stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. "I wasn't sure you would," she whispered. Graham held her close, feeling the last pieces of his old life falling away, making room for something new, something better. "For 5 years, I've been hiding from life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "From connections, from possibilities." He lifted her chin gently, meeting her eyes. "You made me want to live again, Elena, not just exist," she smiled through tears. "Even after everything? The danger, the complications?" "Especially after everything," Graham replied. "You were brave enough to stand up against powerful people who were doing wrong, brave enough to risk everything for the truth." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "How could I not fall in love with that kind of courage?" Elena's eyes widened at his words. "Love," Graham smiled, the expression no longer unfamiliar on his face. "Love," he confirmed. "It snuck up on me somewhere between fixing fences and running from fake FBI agents." Elena laughed, the sound bright with joy. "It snuck up on me too," she admitted. "When I showed up at your gate that day, I just needed shelter. I never expected to find home," Graham finished for her. She nodded, tears spilling over. "Home." He kissed her then, the future opening before them like a road leading to places neither had imagined. Later, as they sat together on the porch of what would become their new home, Elena rested her head on Graham's shoulder. "What do we do now?" she asked. Graham thought about it. The trial against Kincaid was months away. Elena's testimony would be crucial, but until then, they had time. "We live," he said simply. "One day at a time." Elena smiled, lacing her fingers through his. "I like that plan." Above them, stars appeared one by one in the deepening twilight, witnesses to a new beginning. Briargate was behind them now, but its lesson remained. Sometimes the unexpected visitor, The one who arrives when you're not looking for connection can become the most important person in your life. Graham had spent 5 years hiding from the world in solitude. Now, with Elena beside him, he was finally ready to rejoin it, not alone but together, not in isolation but in love. Sometimes, the longest journey isn't measured in miles, but in the distance between closed hearts that finally open to each other. For Graham and Elena, that journey had begun with a woman at a gate on a foggy spring morning, and now it would continue. Beyond the gate, beyond the past, into a future neither could have imagined. Together.